welcome back. That was great to hear His Excellency there, and a wonderful way to actually open up this first conclave of 2021. So let's get down to business here. We have a tremendous lineup of speakers for all of you today, and I'm really excited that this first session, we begin with a very dynamic entrepreneur whose groundbreaking work in artificial intelligence gives us really a glimpse into what the future is likely to be. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce to you the CEO and co-founder of ADDO in Singapore. Dr. Ayesha Khanna joins us now. Dr. Ayesha, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, of course, you've been doing tremendous work, and you have a great background on Wall Street back in the day. There's so much that you have done, but your big focus now, of course, on artificial intelligence, and that's where we're all so exciting. But you bring in depth of knowledge to actually be able to deliver such great work. Talk to me about, I suppose, when we look at the world really being forced to adopt and adapt to the digital transformation really across every sector. And I think this has happened particularly with great speed in 2020. But how has this benefited, so to speak, continuity in business?
I think it's accelerated a lot of the digital transformation that we were seeing happening across all sectors. But basically, more has happened in 1 year during the pandemic than has happened in the last 10 years in terms of the recognition that without digitization, it is very hard to be resilient, to be adaptive, and to be data-driven in one's decision-making. And the reason that people have realized this is because those who undertook that journey, whether it was the e-commerce giants or the education institutions, or even the healthcare hospitals with private telehealth medicine, they are the ones who thrived. The stock market shows it, and of course their customers are much happier. It shows that the only way to live in a world of continual shocks, as we now expect, whether it is technological disruption, demographic disruption, geopolitical, or pandemic, we need to be more data-driven and more agile, and that only happens with digital.
Yes, indeed. And I think we're going to probably stop talking about it being a disruptive force, because now we're almost getting used to it. It's becoming, I think, the destination, so to speak, and we're all heading in that direction. But talk to me about how this has perhaps impacted, cities to be smarter. Yes, I mean, I think we can see in terms of how institutions and banks and the stock market and everybody, but has it actually helped, policymakers and cities and how we live? Has it shifted that and really, I suppose, geared us all into the direction we need to be going?
Well, one would hope it had affected everyone, but let's be honest, there are very few cities that are really truly adapting. I happen to be in one of them. So I think that in the beginning, you just see whose crisis management is better. They are the cities like Singapore or countries like New Zealand who have really been able, or Taiwan, a lot of the East Asian countries that have managed with technology, whether it's Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, or digital contact tracing, been able to keep the rates low and have been able to identify and basically have stay-at-home notices for those who carry any risk of contagion. So that's just the first step. The second is, how do you deal with the enormous disruption to children and students? And in that too, we have seen that there has been countries that had a haphazard response, and others that have actually been able to use their Ministry of Education to roll out online education, to upskill their teachers at the same time, and to make sure that it's still not perfect, but it is less disruptive than it would have been. So it's a ripple effect across all agencies. And I think that can be taken as a challenge by smart cities. And of course, my PhD is in smart cities. I think a lot about this. Or it can be ignored when we go past pandemic, and that is the danger that I see in some places in the world.
Yes, indeed. And of course, it's not even, I guess, in every different city. As you said, you're a great depth of study and that academic work, but also you see it practically and you see how it's rolling out. if you were to look at, I suppose, trends as such, where would you see, I suppose, the top trends when we look at artificial intelligence dominated businesses particularly? What's working, what's not?
Well, what's really working is the things that you need for sure immediately. E-commerce, that has been a huge winner in all of this, because that and the supply chain, which is logistics. So to the point that every single company that was able to deliver, whether it was food or any kinds of goods, are now finding that they have the cash and have the customer loyalty that is extremely sticky. We are already seeing proposals go up for businesses now that are retrofitting apartment buildings to have terraces that are primed for drone deliveries. So that, I think, has been incredibly powerful in terms of a business that is done well. Then every other sector that you see apart from that has also benefited, but only those winners that have been ahead of the game. Whether you see it in healthcare, education, infrastructure, mobility, all of them have adapted to the different kinds of new constraints put in. I think the big trend, which is very interesting, is the 15-minute city. And it's a big, it's all vogue in Paris because it came from a French philosopher. And the idea is that why should we go anywhere more than 15 minutes to what we need, whether it's my gym, it's my food, it's my clinic, it's my workplace. And this means that you can't just have buildings. You have hybrid spaces that dynamically change with augmented reality and artificial intelligence to become what you need it to become. If I'm pregnant or I have a cancer tumor, I don't want to go to a hospital and have a big ultrasound machine. With Butterfly Network's handheld ultrasound and a small corner clinic, I can go there and have myself checked, and the ultrasound will have artificial intelligence that will already recommend some diagnosis. And with 5G, maybe my doctor could be hundreds of miles away or just 20 miles away, can actually prescribe me medication. My home can have a gym in it. If you look at Tonal, it's basically a gym in the shape of a mirror. You pull it down, it has digital weights and an AI trainer that pushes you just like your real trainer would. I mean, we have just scratched the surface of what is now a city that is essentially a hybrid physical virtual space, and everything you need within 15 minutes.
I think that's so, you're so right. And I think this is what everybody wants. And we're beginning to even see it, I think, in architecture and design as well. So in the physical space, people are thinking about that and the fact that there's I think, an element of community. And if nothing else, I think 2020 has really shown that that can be possible. And as you say, some of it is already working. So it's about working on what works, so to speak. But talk to me about, how this can be rolled out, particularly in emerging economies, and how do they, I suppose, compete with just what you were describing too, because it's not all equal around the world.
Well, I'm very impressed with, and we work with governments in emerging markets as well. In fact, we are going to start building a large crisis health management infrastructure for one of the largest ASEAN countries' health ministry, so that they can not only connect to all COVID statistics around the country, but using that data, be able to predict where COVID hotspots may happen, and then use that as a health crisis platform. Do they have all the connections already in place? No. Are they putting it in? Yes. And that is where it requires bold leadership and investment. It actually doesn't either cost that much, nor is it that difficult. The constraint is often talent, and that's where you have great intermediaries like the Islamic Development Bank that provides funding and connects governments and emerging markets, Muslim countries, to these kinds of expertise and platforms. Once you have that kind of thing, then you are in a position to begin to use that platform to expand outward. And that is the key. If you build the foundation correctly of a data infrastructure, it's a gift that keeps on giving, because that data is now reusable. Of course, I can never talk about data without talking about governance. That would be very foolhardy and remiss of me. So wherever you take citizen data or allow consumer facing companies to take citizen data, you must have governance and regulation. And I really appreciate being here in Singapore, how I have seen the government really work on privacy and even ethical regulations for AI. And I'm also impressed with the European Union's GDPR, which also sets a standard for data privacy and data dignity as a human right. Once you put governance with AI together, then you get a lot of benefits from it.
And I like that phrase too, as you say there, data dignity, because it is one of the areas, I think, that privacy that everybody, and we've even heard it in recent days when we look at some of the social media platforms that are shifting and changing things, people really looking and wondering, what's in it for them and what are the dangers that are out there. So it is something that everybody wants to look at. And of course, it's incumbent on all of these big operators to provide that dignity, as you call it, because yes, they just can't take that data. I absolutely love that. Of course, emerging economies, but also the developing world. I mean, there's a huge gap there when we still look at what's going on. And again, so many players have to be brought into that. It's about, energy poverty, it's about eradication of poverty, and really hopefully bringing everybody, up to the table, so to speak, and being able to take such great advantages of what the world can offer and what the digital space can offer. So this also, when it comes to governments, governance, I suppose, must be something too that you look at and concerns you as well.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is that when you go to the poorer countries, then you have, the mobile phone becomes a primary medium for a number of interactions, whether it is with the government, or with private companies, and even with their work. So on the one hand, it's an enormous avenue for them to have digital work. A place like Pakistan has 220 million people, and the average age is 23 years old. And they are one of the largest freelancer markets for digital work in the world, even though access to education is not democratically equal for all citizens. Yet, because they can learn through the internet and they can participate in the knowledge economy, they are able to benefit greatly from these new skills. On the other hand, the government is paying attention to all this data and making sure, for example, that the data does not leave the country. This trend of data localization is quite interesting because countries are saying it's our citizens' data. You can't just take it and put it in a server in California and then use it and resell it and God knows do what with it. So we are seeing more stringent regulations. And of course, when there are regulations, there's good innovation. In artificial intelligence, you can actually use transfer learning and use that as a way to actually get data from the edge or from the mobile phone without getting the PII or personally identifiable indicators. So I think that there's a nice tango between innovation and regulation. As long as citizen rights are protected, the private sector will adapt and find better ways to serve them with the same data.
Yes, indeed. And I suppose it's becoming part of the sort of democratization of access to. So in many ways, even as you say, while they may not be in the school system, the power of actually having a mobile phone and the detail and the data and the learning that people can find on that, and that sort of the gig economy, the freelance economy that is global, and people have been able to take advantage. All of that, I think, bringing a great sense of inclusion into the world. So that's really important. Now, I know you've written a few books, you've written so many papers, but I want to particularly talk to you about, your book, You and AI. And, when you were working on that, talk to me a little bit perhaps about some of the very significant queries, that you were hearing from people, particularly when it comes to AI. What were organizations and people, what did they want to know, and what could you deliver? What did you learn maybe?
Well, the most important thing in U plus AI was the concept of human agency, or the intent and will and the ability to perform what the human being wants. And the most dangerous thing in human computer interaction is being a passive recipient or observer of whatever the AI is giving you, whether it's YouTube or games or anything else. So for me, everything starts with a philosophical relationship, whether we are the CEO of a company or a young child with technology. It's not going to go away. We have to have a mindset when we look at it. It's almost like having a screwdriver. We don't just stare at the screwdriver, we pick it up and do something with it. We should look at AI and technology and iPads and iPhones like that. And when that happens, it unleashes our creativity. So the first thing was for me to think about, what does that mean in terms of education? So parents have a lot of questions regarding that. And then people in mid-career or otherwise in companies have a lot of questions. They feel they may be left out or automated. And this fear essentially comes from this lack of a solid relationship, thinking that we can use this for our benefit as opposed to waiting for it to disrupt one. So that's the first step. And the second then, of course, is learning the basics of computational thinking is like reading, writing, and doing math for anybody. Everybody doesn't not need to become a data scientist like me and my team, but they should know how to talk to one, because that collaboration is what leads to innovation. Now, I wouldn't tell, if somebody came to me and said, you know, your child will not learn how to write in school, I would think that's ridiculous. Yet we tolerate our schools not teaching computer science as a mandatory subject to children or even to adults. And that's what I find very problematic and hope to change, because without creative confidence and in that relationship with technology, we will not be able to use it for our benefit. And that will create a big digital divide between those who do know and those who do not know AI.
No, I mean, there's so much, very, very fascinating and interesting things in what you say there. But I love that concept of that we all need to do something with it, not be just, passive receivers of what's going on and letting it. And I think, as you said, when people get involved with this, it's about being creative, but it's also about taking charge, I think. I have a few questions coming in, and one of the other areas, of course, that you've worked, and it's not just people being involved, but talk to me about the 21C Girls Project too, and how actually, some of the works. This comes from Murada in Delhi, who has actually talked about this, and particularly looking at enabling women's leadership when it comes to AI.
I realized some time ago that I was one of the few technical women sitting at board meetings, and it really bothered me because I felt that if you have 10 people on a board and only one woman who's a technologist, in fact, maybe the only woman on the board anyway, that means that we are not using the brain power and creative power of half of one's population in this very fundamental technology, for God's sake. So what I did was I started 21st Century Girls, which is a charity in Singapore with the aim to educate girls in coding and as they grow older in the basics of artificial intelligence, regardless of their background. So over 10 weeks, we have a program called Empower, and every Saturday the girls come, they learn the basics of coding and statistics. They learn to connect business problems to AI solutions, and they learn the ethics of artificial intelligence and applying it with responsibility. And after that, they are full of confidence. And that is what I love. Not all of them become AI engineers, but they are no longer afraid to sit at that table, to give their opinion and to probe what the AI engineers are saying. And that's when it's an equal relationship. That's when progress happens, and nobody's jobs should be, the tasks may be automated, but nobody can be automated away if they have that kind of attitude.
Absolutely, and I think it's having that power and that knowledge that's going to make such a great difference. So a tremendous initiative, and well done. I know you put your heart and soul into that, and as I can hear, you're continuing to do that. I have a few more questions here. And Tom Powell from the UK, he actually asks about, when we're looking at the economic impact of the crisis, particularly, and how companies and industry, they're cutting back on costs. And this is something that's, very real out there. But where do you see investments that are absolutely essential when it comes to really creating the tech infrastructure and the tech environment whereby, companies can actually thrive now and in the future?
Right. That's a really good question. There are two main investments that need to happen. One is the cloud infrastructure. So the cloud has drastically lowered the price of doing data science and artificial intelligence and machine learning. That can be available to companies in two ways. One is they can just go and get it. They just need good wireless and telecommunications infrastructure. So that's the most important thing one can invest in as a country. The second is the government can actually subsidize it, as it does in Singapore, for example, and it also subsidizes AI tools for small businesses that cannot afford it. That is one place of investment because it lowers the cost and speeds up adoption so much more than if you were doing it the old way. The second way is skills upgrading. There is no substitute for that. And I think that means at every level, whether you're at a business level, a financial analyst, a project manager, a designer, you need to learn some of the basic courses which are available for free on platforms like edX and Coursera. And then you need the time to actually do some pilots, etc. But those are normal. Every time you do an innovation in a company, it needs some political resistance. But at least it shouldn't be that you don't have the skill or that you do not have the infrastructure. So infrastructure, cloud plus skills plus training are the two main ways to actually invest and expedite this transformation.
And a couple of questions around to follow on from that, and I'll take one from Sarah from in Norway. Actually, we have viewers around the world, which is so exciting here. But I mean, talking about, again, privacy rules and cybersecurity as a best practice. And obviously, this is something that everybody has to put in place, but it can't become too cumbersome at the same time. What do you think is the best way to approach this?
Cybersecurity, again, there are two ways. First of all, being on the cloud, it's already managed for you. So that helps a lot for smaller companies. If you're a big company, you need to actually go to cybersecurity experts, or there's some great cybersecurity companies. This war between cyber hackers and cybersecurity officials is never ending. There's never a winner for too long. And that is the danger in which how we live. So then every individual needs to consider how much of their private life they put online or give to companies, and governments need to consider how much of their critical infrastructure has single points of failure. And these are, by the way, people are thinking a lot about these issues. Then becomes privacy. In privacy, we see many more regulations coming up. GDPR in Europe is considered stringent, but California's CCPA is considered even more stringent. And that is saying the same thing, that a customer's data must be stored in a way where you can always find it and delete it. And none of the American companies are set up that way because they have a lot of disorganized, siloed data everywhere, actually all over the world. And so we will see with this push from regulation, a cleaning up and organization in the coming 5 to 6, 8 years, where people will organize their data and there will be a real need for it because there will be fines associated with it. I mean, as we see in GDPR, but it will happen all over the world. So I think that is really the key in actually being able to comply with new regulations.
Yes, indeed. And what you say too about how we're also, we're so generous in many ways in giving our data out there. This is something that, is a problem sometimes in terms of what we do. So we need to be aware of it. I think we have a small little technical issue here. Maybe it's just a camera issue. I'm sure, Ayesha, there we are. We have you. But quite a few questions too, following on from what you talked about there in terms of how can AI empower women, but also when you look at human capital. I mean, the robots aren't going to take over the universe. They're actually going to help, but there will still be a need, for human capital and human talent to make sure that we're all part and parcel, and it's a win-win in the end.
Yes, It will, but only for those who are willing to educate themselves. There is a real danger, and one should, admit it. There is a real danger for those who are used to routine tasks, who are not in the mood to change, regardless of their age or position, that they will be left without a job. Because these robots are coming and they're doing more and more sophisticated things. So it's an odd kind of pressure on all of us. I have an artificial intelligence company. There is now AI that builds AI. So I myself, with my team, are in constant and clear and present danger of being automated every day. And it keeps us on our toes. We've accepted it. I think it's just so hard to have a mindset that says, well, this is it. And I need to be this way. And my kids and my family and friends, this is our new way of being. And we have to be creative and constantly adapt. So I think the sooner one accepts that bitter pill, it can actually become quite sweet and interesting, our life.
And indeed, I suppose, we have to wrap up in just a minute here, but I suppose that's a lovely way to close it to is, this word of, wisdom maybe tinged with a little bit of caution in terms of the fact that, AI is here to stay, technology is here to stay, but really it's about making sure that we all adapt and adopt it, I suppose.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. Yeah, I always say there is a lot of good in AI, but you have to do it with responsibility and with good governance. And that's what I would recommend. But I would also say it's super fun. And not only because I'm a geek, I truly believe it's like a great thing to learn, and you should. And there's so many opportunities for everyone to develop new products and services.
And I've got to really get into your book and read it with more detail to really just see and appreciate it. Because as you say, yes, this is where we're all headed, and it can add so much advantage to our life. We've got to leave it there. Dr. Ayesha Khanna, thank you so much, the CEO and co-founder of ADDO in Singapore. Hopefully we'll stay connected and people can have a look at your great background, see what you're doing and learn from it, because ultimately the future looks very bright out there for everybody. Once again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye.
And a big thank you to all of our viewers there. Stay with us. We'll be right back on ABLF.